I'm happy to welcome back Professor Gary Rensburg from Rutgers. If you remember, Gary spoke about Jews of medieval England last year, and he's back today to talk about Jews of Arabia. Gary is the Blanche and Irving Laurie Professor of Jewish Studies at Rutgers. He's been there since 2004. Received his bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, his master's and PhD from NYU. He's authored curricula in the Great Courses program, and in addition to his teaching duties at Rutgers, he's also been a visiting scholar at a number of academic institutions, including Oxford and Cambridge Universities, UCLA, Cornell, and Hebrew University. Okay, I'd like to welcome Gary Rensburg.
Thank you very much, Hank, for that lovely introduction. It's great to be back at Ohev Shalom. And as Hank said, last year, it was in February, I presented on the Jews of medieval England, and that would be the far northwest corner of a Jewish diaspora in the general world of Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. And today we're going to the exact opposite geographical extreme, which is the far southeast of the map that you see here. So you can see the breadth of the Roman Empire and its geographical span from the Atlantic Ocean, Iberia, France, Britain in the far west, the entire Mediterranean, and you see Judea and Jerusalem specifically in the far southeast of the Roman Empire. So this was the stretch of the Roman Empire, 1st century BCE, 1st century CE, about 2,000 years ago. And during that time period, you have the Jewish revolts. The more famous of the two is the Great Revolt, which led to the loss of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE, and then the final fall of Masada in the year 73, what we call the Great Revolt. 2 generations later, you have the Bar Kokhba Revolt, a second revolt, because the Jews simply did not want to live under Roman rule. And there is the dates for the Bar Kokhba Revolt. And although Jerusalem was already destroyed, there were still Jews living in the general region. But after the Bar Kokhba Revolt, the Romans, Emperor Hadrian, decreed that Jews could no longer live in the environs of Jerusalem. So you had various choices if you wanted to be where you wanted to live at this point. Jewish life, if you wanted to stay in the land of Israel, you moved north to the Galilee. And that's where the great burgeoning of Jewish life happened in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. Lots of archaeological evidence for that. Jews could move in other parts of the Roman Empire, which they did, into North Africa, into the Aegean, to Rome itself. But little known part of Jewish history is that a number of Jews decided to leave the Roman Empire altogether, and they went south or southeast into Arabia, into the vast open spaces of the Arabian desert, where they were outside Roman rule altogether. And their Jewish life actually flourished in a way that is only now coming into focus, because this was not something that we knew about up until the last few decades. So let's look at the evidence. First, here's our map of Arabia. The map is in French, but it's the best one I have that has lots of details that I need to show you. And most of the western part of the Arabian Peninsula, where you see all those names, is actually habitable. A lot of it is desert, but there are large oases along the entire Red Sea coast, which affords for life. Now, the 2 areas which had Jewish communities, relatively large Jewish communities at an early time period, are these 2 regions right here. So in the northern part of Arabia, in northwestern Arabia, you see that there are 2 oases there, 3 of them actually indicated in my box, but Tema and Al-Hijr are the ones that we're going to be looking at. And then we'll move to the far southwest of the Arabian Peninsula, what is today Yemen. And there you can see there's something called Himyar. We'll be talking about the kingdom of Himyar. So the Jews in the northwestern region, the Jews in Tema, my upper box, and Al-Hijr, and actually not all that far from the land of Israel. You can see Jerusalem on the map there. Now, this is what this region looks like. I've never been. But if you've been to southern Israel or southern Jordan, and you went across the border into Saudi Arabia, it doesn't all look that different. So those of us who've been to southern Jordan, for example, myself on several occasions to Petra and to Wadi Rum, or the Negev of southern Israel, the terrain is the same, right? The natural boundary, natural terrain doesn't get changed just because of a somewhat artificial national boundary on the modern map. So this is the vast emptiness of northwest Arabia, and these are just captured from an internet website of archaeologists who were exploring this region in search of antiquity. Now, occasionally you get oases, and as I mentioned, Tema is one of the largest oases in northwestern Arabia. So you see the palm trees, because all of a sudden there are natural springs. That's what creates the oasis. There's palm springs, there's growth. And you can see the walls of the ancient city of Tema now in ruin, but it gives us a sense that there was, of course, a large community here based on the size of the archaeological remains. It was here that the earliest evidence for Jews in the Arabian Peninsula was found just a few decades ago. It is an inscription in Aramaic, but it's in the script called Nabatean. So let me sort of sort this out for you. We're going to be looking at a variety of languages and scripts that were used in the Arabian Peninsula. So Aramaic had spread. Jews were using Aramaic in the land of Israel, and others in the region were using Aramaic. And how many of you have been to Petra? Anyone? Okay, Petra is the city, one of the major cities of the Nabateans, but that was also true of the cities that I'm going to be looking at with you here. And the Nabateans used Aramaic, but had their own special alphabet instead of the alphabet that the Jews used, which is the same as the Hebrew alphabet. So here is an Aramaic inscription in Nabatean script, and it says, it's a tomb inscription. This is the memorial of Isaiah, the counselor, son of Yosef, chief citizen of Tema. And it was erected by his family members, and then they give us a date, which we can calculate. It adds up to 100, it adds up to 98. But you add 105 to that, because that's when they use their calendar reckoning. From 105 CE is how this community started reckoning its calendar. And we can calculate this to the year 203 CE. Now, if this Jewish man named Isaiah, and there's nothing Jewish on this inscription, there's no menorah, it's just the letters, of course. But anybody who's named Isaiah, the son of Yosef, you know that this is going to be a Jew. If this person, Isaiah, served as the city council, or whatever the word counselor means, and that he was the son of Yosef, and therefore also chief citizen, it's not clear if Yosef was the chief citizen of Tema, which must be something like mayor, or whether Isaiah was both the counselor and the chief citizen. The grammar could go either way. Either way, if this was a Jew of such high rank in the city in the year 203 when he died, when did he didn't arrive there probably in the year 200 and become on the city council or the mayor or something like that, right? He probably became his family was probably there in 150 or 130 or 100. Bar Kokhba rebellion, maybe before that, maybe after the first revolt. The point we're trying to make here is that this is the earliest evidence for Jews in this region, but that this is evidence that there must have been Jewish communities there already 50, 75, 100 years earlier. Quite remarkable. Now, the other site we're going to look at is Al-Hijr, and if you have been to Petra, you'll see how similar it looks. The massive structures built right into the mountainsides. Its modern name is Madi Salih, but in antiquity it was called Al-Hijr. And again, a Jewish memorial inscription was found there. All it is the Nabatean script again, Aramaic language. In this case, all we, again, same as the previous one, all we have are names. There's nothing Jewish on this. There's no Jewish symbols or anything like that. And you'll see why am I mentioning that, because in other places we do get Jewish symbols. But we learn here that the person's name is Adyon, not particularly Jewish, but he's the son of Choni, the son of Samuel. And so those are names that we do know have to be Jewish names. And so we can date this, again, based on the dating system. They date it to the year 251, you add the 105 to it, and you get to 356 CE. So Jews in this region of northwestern Arabia in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th centuries. Not a lot of evidence, but clearly these Jews didn't live by themselves. Archaeological evidence is always simply the chance discovery and the chance preservation of something. Now, here's a second item from that same place. The impossible to date, it's just a stone sundial. But on the bottom, it says, Menashe bar Natan Shlam. Okay, Menashe, the son of Nathan, peace. Right? This is the Jew, clearly, given those names again, who donated the sundial. Not everybody had a watch and a digital this and a digital that. Right? There was the communal sundial which sat in the middle of the town, and if you needed to know the time for any reason, up until modernity or up until the Renaissance, this is what you did. And so there's this beautiful sundial now in the Istanbul Museum, the Jewish name. Ask questions as we come along. I have a small group. How large is that sundial? I think it's about 2 to 3 feet high. 3 feet high.
Is that the first sundial in existence?
Oh, no. There are sundials throughout the Roman Empire. Right. Every town in the Roman Empire has a sundial.
But who invented the sundial?
Probably, I'm not sure. I'm lost in the mist of time. It was a way of keeping the track of the shadows to give you the time of day. A very rough estimate, of course, of what we today call hours. So here we are back on the track. We're back on the trek and the track. I've, again, not been there. These are images courtesy of a colleague who goes out to this region of Arabia, or who has other colleagues who go out to this region, and you just hire a van and a driver and so on, and a guide, and you go off to the antiquities. And look at the landscape. It's just emptiness, and you have these stones, but you see that these stones are inscribed. Not all of them. So these are essentially something like graffiti, right? These were people who just somewhat coarsely inscribed various things on these stones. We have these now literally by the tens of thousands. There is an ongoing effort to get all of these found, recorded, transcribed, and of course in this digital age put onto a website where all these inscriptions are collected. And occasionally one finds references to Jews, including this one just recently discovered, which is a Jewish Nabatean Arabic, because the languages are sort of on the border there between where Arabic was spoken and Aramaic was spoken, and some of the words look more like Arabic. But the letter forms are all part of this Nabatean script. And you can see this is quite coarse compared to the previous inscriptions which I showed you, especially the first one, very professionally done. And these are just regular stones that are found out there in the desert. What does it say? It says, Yeh, sorry, Mesholai, the son of Ausho, certainly not Jewish name by any means, be remembered well and be secure before the Lord of the world. If you can read the Hebrew, which is actually Aramaic, at the end of the second line, Mare Alma, the Lord of the world, that's the Aramaic for Adon Olam, right? Okay, this is exactly the equivalency of that. And this writing he wrote on the day of Passover, the year 197. Nothing in this inscription that would tell you that we are looking at anything Jewish other than the fact that the holiday of Passover is mentioned. I guess it's fun to every once in a while read these things out in native language, okay? V'li techir sholi bar osho betav ushlam min kadam mare alma. That's the first 2 lines. Ukatva dena kitav yom chag al fatir shnat ma'at v'tish'in v'sheva. So the holiday there, Hag al-Fatir, is actually Arabic. Okay? Fatir is the Aramaic and Arabic word for Passover. So those of you who know the way the Torah works, if you have the Targum, the Aramaic translation, and it says Pesach in Hebrew, it says Fatir in, or at least Matzot, it's called Fatir in the Aramaic. But the al is the Arabic definite article. So it's sort of mixing Arabic and Aramaic here together. But in any case, he wrote this when Yom Chag al-Fatir, the day of the feast of Passover. Such and such date, which equates to 302 CE. Just found 2 years ago, just published this year, 2008.
So he wasn't inhibited to write on Passover?
Well, we don't know if it was the first day of Passover or one of the intermediate days of Passover, in which case it would have been perfectly permissible. And remember that the halakha develops over time, so, and not everybody was following halakha then and now, so these are all the issues, of course. I mean, I thought of the same question, okay. Thanks, yeah. Okay, so all of that is the region we've just been looking at here. This vast desert where you have a couple of oases, and even out in the desert you can find inscriptions that relate to Jews. And I only showed you, the most famous of them is Passover.
You always added a certain number, like in this case 105. What is the 105 that was added represent?
105 was the year that the Romans took over Petra. And then the Romans incorporated Petra into their kingdom, into their empire. At which point the Nabateans started calculating the calendar because their chief city, Petra, was now in the Roman Empire, and they recalculated their calendar that way. And we can determine this from these hundreds, if not thousands, of dating inscriptions and how this all works. Yeah.
Where do all those rocks come from?
They're just all there. You have to ask a geologist, not a historian. They're just there. Okay. Go to southern Jordan one day. If you can't get to Saudi Arabia, obviously. You can go to southern Jordan very easily. They're just rocks everywhere. Okay, out in the desert. Okay. Now, I want to jump ahead by a couple of centuries, but actually to move us to early Muslim writers. So I've been showing you material from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. In the 7th century, you have the rise of Islam. And we'll talk about that at the end. 7th century, the rise of Islam. The Muslims, the earliest Muslim writers, and now we have lots of material. Right? We have Muslim writers writing in 650 and 680. The Quran is from around 650. We have Muslim writers, not only religious texts, but historical texts, and poetic texts, and all sorts of texts. And they're just telling us about life in Arabia, which is wonderful. A number of Muslim writers writing in Arabic recall the great Jewish poet Samuel bin Adiyah, which would be Samuel ibn Adiyah, who lived about 100 plus years ago. But they knew his poetry still. He was a great Jewish poet who wrote poetry in Arabic before the age of Islam. But the early Muslim poets and songwriters and songsters and songstresses would recite his poetry still. Do you understand that? Right? So we actually know of this great Jewish poet, not from Jewish sources, with one exception possibly, but always from these Muslim writers. And they mention him over and over again. This is not just a single, occasional reference. So he's well known. And they tell us that he was the poet of Taima, the first oasis I showed you, and that he was a warrior, and that he built a castle there, and his castle is actually described by a later Muslim writer, Aisha Maimun, which must have still been standing a century or two later. We may have one example of his poetry. Right? We don't really have it except when occasional Muslims recite it in their own text. They quote it. But we may actually have one of his poems. So this is found in the Cairo Genizah, which is a whole other topic. But one of his poems from a manuscript of around the year 1000, or maybe a little bit later, 11th century, you have a text. It's in Hebrew characters, but it's Arabic language. This is the Arabic poetry of Samuel ibn Adiyah. One example of one of his poems. Just a remarkable chance discovery that we have actually one of his poems. It's in Cambridge University Library. And this was discovered way more than 100 years ago, and this is the standard article about it, how we found one of his poems still in a manuscript in the Middle Ages. Okay, that's Northern Arabia. Bits of evidence, not huge amounts of evidence, but sufficient amounts of evidence. And now we go to Southern Arabia, right? You can picture the map here. And the reddish, pinkish area there is more or less Yemen today. And across the Red Sea, you have Eritrea and Ethiopia in the green. Now, these are various kingdoms and languages and so on that this map is indicating for us. But the ones you really need to focus on are the reddish pinkish one, called the Kingdom of Himyar, and you see the capital city of Safar. And across the Red Sea in green is the kingdom of Aksum, its capital city of Aksum. So let's start with Aksum. This was a Christian kingdom in Ethiopia. To this day, the Ethiopic Church, Orthodox Church, retains the traditions of this kingdom of Aksum 3rd, 4th, 5th century. And they read the Bible in Ethiopic translation that was translated at this time period. So you have this Christian kingdom on the other side of the Red Sea. These two areas on either side of the Red Sea were constantly in conflict with one another to control the trade routes along the Red Sea, because out of, if you take that all the way to the east, you get to India and so on through the Indian Ocean. And so the kingdom of Himyar, the king of Himyar, named Yusuf, converted to Judaism and created a Jewish kingdom in Yemen in this early 6th century CE. How many of you knew there was a Jewish kingdom in Yemen in the 6th century? Now, how did he learn about Judaism? Because there were Jews there already, obviously, in the 300s and 400s, which allowed for Yusuf vu Nuwas to convert to Judaism in 5 months. Just one of these little-known pieces of Jewish history where you get to see the amazing diversity of Jewish life in late antiquity or now the early Middle Ages. Why he converted to Judaism, we don't know. Don't have a lot of sources. It's very possible, we can theorize, that since his enemies on the other side of the Red Sea had become Christians, he decided it was a good thing perhaps to take on another monotheistic religion and became Jewish. Islam doesn't exist. But of course, as I said, he didn't do this out of nowhere. He must have been exposed to Jews, and let's go look now at all the Jewish evidence that we have from this region. First of all, why does anybody live in southern Arabia? Okay, first of all. These are the two major products of southern Arabia. This is the GNP. This is what drives the economy of that region. Myrrh and frankincense grow only there and nowhere else in the world. And these two fragrant woods were exported from southern Arabia up the Red Sea coast into the land of Israel area, and then across the Mediterranean from the port of Gaza or the port of Jaffa, across the Mediterranean throughout the Aegean, the Greek and Roman worlds, and into ancient Egypt as well. Why did they need myrrh and frankincense? All of the temples of the ancient world, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Canaanite, Babylonian, etc., all had animal sacrifices, ditto, of course, for the Jews in the Jerusalem temple. I don't want to discuss you on a Sunday morning, but that all smells, okay? Right? I mean, I don't want to turn the sacredness of the temple into the reality, but it is basically a slaughterhouse. And so they needed the fragrant woods to make the place smell nice. And you did whatever you could to make the place beautiful. And that meant importing myrrh and frankincense from faraway South Arabia. And the Bible mentions this as well, that these were part of the fragrances, and it then becomes ritualized. So, for example, in the Jerusalem temple, you not only have the big altar for the sacrifices of the animals, but you have a small incense altar. And so this becomes part of the cultures of the ancient world, and that made the peoples of southern Arabia exceedingly wealthy. By the way, this region, can't get mine. Can you see the red dot? It's not displaying well. This region of Safar is actually the ancient kingdom of Sheba. So when you read in the Bible that the Queen of Sheba visited Jerusalem, King Solomon, bearing spices, it's all part of that same description, all part of that same activity that I'm describing for you here. And they went up the Red Sea coast either on ships or on camel caravans on land. And then they would have to be transported if they went on ship from Eilat, Aqaba region, they'd have to be transported across the land to Gaza or Jaffa, and then loaded on boats into the Mediterranean. Yeah, thank you.
Gary, so Sheba wasn't then modern-day Ethiopia? Was
No, modern-day Yemen. The Ethiopian Christians claim that they are Sheba, but it is actually Yemen. They have adapted or adopted the lore and the folklore and claim that they are where Sheba was, but we know Sheba was actually on the other side of the Red Sea. So that's myrrh and frankincense. And that's just a sidelight as to why these kingdoms in southern Arabia actually were able to flourish. Okay. Safar, the capital city of this kingdom, and there's the general excavations of it. I just remind us that the trade would have taken place in these large pottery vessels. And I've never been here either. I'm just doing this because I can capture these images from colleagues and so on. But burial chambers, the usual kinds of things that one finds in archaeological excavations. Now, in this region, we have dozens of Jewish inscriptions, remarkably. Most of them written in a language called Sabaic. Actually, that word Saba is actually Arshiva, okay? But the local language, they called it Saba. Saba is the name of that region in their own language. And we call this Sabaic. It's basically South Arabian. If you want to call it South Arabian, that's fine. It is distinct from Arabic. It's extinct. I mean, that region only uses Arabic today, but in this time period, it was the Sabaic language which was used throughout. They had their own alphabet. And here is a very large monumental inscription in the rock, and it mentions Yehuda, first word, that's the boxes around it. It gives us in Sa'ahu Yisrael, his people Israel, and it mentions the word synagogue in that language, Mikra. Okay, I've transcribed those words, those letters into Hebrew letters, basically transcribed with one-to-one correspondence, even though they look differently. And that's from around the year 400. So these would have all been there before Yusuf decided to convert to Judaism, the king. The same inscription refers to God as the Lord of life and death, the Lord of heaven and earth. Again, in that local language. So this is clearly a Jewish inscription. Now, remarkably, this is my open image, somebody came, do you see in the middle there? Somebody came and inscribed or incised into the rock what we call a Hebrew graffito. You all remember that graffiti is plural, right? Graffito is singular in Italian. So here, it's not displaying well. Can you see that dot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having trouble picking there. Okay. So this is actual Hebrew letters, right? Katav Yehuda Zafor Latov Amen Shalom Amen. Judah wrote this, may he be remembered for good. Amen Shalom. In Yemen, 1,500 plus years ago. It's remarkable. Here's some more of these Sabaic inscriptions. Again, this one mentions the people of Israel. Right there. By the time we're done, you can all read the Sabaic alphabet. It also refers to God as the God, El, God, Lord of heaven and earth. This one, also in the rock, a synagogue dedicatory inscription. The ruins of the synagogue are long disappeared, but this inscription in the rock is still there. So we don't really know what the synagogue would have looked like. But this is actually dated to a specific date that we can turn to August 433. These are all approximate dates when I don't give you something specific. Like this one here, I said circa, this one I didn't say circa. But this is specifically the year 433. It's in a place called Raida, 70 kilometers north of Sana, the capital of modern-day Yemen. And this was published back in the 1970s by a Belgian scholar when he found this. And here's the inscription, here's the translation. This such and such people have built and completed this synagogue, the word mikrab in their language for synagogue. Synagogue has a name, Barik, right? This is Ohev Shalom, okay, lover of peace. This is called Barik, the blessed place, or the blessed one. Okay, every synagogue has to have a name, right? For God, El, God, El, Lord of the sky and earth, etc. And so you see all of this description here of the synagogue, and then again at the end. And it's dated, and we can convert the date to 433 CE. And a dedicatory inscription for a cemetery. Jewish community has to have its own cemetery. So, here you are. There's no photo available for this one. I haven't been able to obtain one yet. And these are found just throughout the region, right? Not all in one place. This one is 250 kilometers southeast of Sana. And so what you see in line, in the beginning of this, right, is that the area for the cemetery plots has been described going down to the fence of the cultivated area to bury the Jews there, with the guarantee that the burial of a Gentile next to them will be avoided, so that the Jews can fulfill their obligations of having their own cemetery. And then it's mentioned again in line 7, right? And it tells you exactly what was traded. You know, they had to trade some land to get the cemetery land. It's all described in this inscription, again, which I do not have a photograph of. And again in line 12, one shall avoid burying a Gentile in these plots. Jewish community fully up and running in the 400s again. The synagogue, the burial plot, cemetery, and with other Jews doing the economy of the land. And just some general pictures of the region of Chassi, even though I don't have a picture of the inscription or the cemetery for that matter. Now, random finds in the region. This one's actually in Aramaic. It's a seal. It's, you know, this big. It's very small. Don't be fooled by the size of the two images, especially the one on the right. And what it is that people would take these stone seals, they're usually oval shape as you see here, and they would stamp them into pieces of clay to show ownership. So for example, that vessel I showed you. Sometimes the vessels along the rim or the handle actually have the owner's name stamped into it, which means that while the potter was making it and the clay was still wet, you stamped your seal into it. You realize that the letters on the seal therefore have to be what? Inverted, right? So that when you stamp it, it's legible. Nobody goes to the post office or library anymore and gets it and stamps it, right? But we used to. We all remember that. Now you scan it with a gun or something, right? But in the old days, when you stamped it, the date and all that was in reverse if you looked at the stamp, so that it was legible on what it was being stamped into. Ditto for this. So you can't read those letters unless you're really good. However, with Photoshop, you can do anything, and I've inverted it. Took my wife and me, I think, about 25 minutes to do this. If we had called our 13-year-old nephew, it would have taken no time at all. But there you can see Yitzchak bar Hanina written, can everybody read it, in the letters that you can actually make out. Nothing Jewish per se, but obviously anybody named Yitzchak bar Hanina is going to be a Jew. Now this one is a bilingual inscription. It starts out in Hebrew/Aramaic, which we'll read in a second. Starts out in Aramaic and then switches to Hebrew. And the second half of it is in the Sabbaic alphabet that I've been showing you. So this is the tombstone of someone named Leah. Its exact provenance is unknown, and it's a private collection at the moment. All we know about it is I don't have a photo, but I do have this line drawing. So let's read the Aramaic there on top. Hada kevurata, this burial place. De Leah, Brat Yehuda, of Leah, the daughter of Judah. And then it switches to Hebrew. Nishmata l'chayei olam, may her soul be for eternal life. V'tanuach v'ta'amod l'goral chayim l'ketzei yamin, amen, amen, shalom. May she rest and may she stand up, may she arise for the fate of, for the fate of life, or for the lot of life at the end of days. In other words, they're expecting resurrection here, messianic thinking, amen, amen, shalom. And then it says very similar words there in the South Arabia. Now, there was a Christian named Philostorgius who lived in the 4th, 5th century, and he wrote, like many Christians at the time, a history of the church, as he knew it, ecclesiastical history in Greek. And Philostorgius reports that a Christian missionary named Theophilus traveled as far south as Yemen. That must have been really quite a trek in the 4th century. But this Christian missionary was looking to convert people to Christianity, obviously. He knew, of course, there were Christians in Ethiopia. But he went to the Yemen as well, and he reports that there were many Jews living in Yemen around the year 350. So we don't have Theophilus's report, but we do have Philostorgius quoting Theophilus, okay? Which is fine. I mean, we rely on this. This is what we rely on. More of these inscriptions. This is the tomb of Yitzchak, and those 4 letters that I have boxed for you there are Yud Tzadi Chet Of. in Sabah. How do I know all this stuff? I've never been to Yemen. And all of us who work in this field are indebted to Christian Robin, so I just wanted to give a shout out to him, although he's in Paris and he won't hear me. But he is the great scholar of South Arabia. He is the unsurpassed master. There is nobody in the world who knows the thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Sabaic inscriptions like Christian Robin. And he has written 2 articles in French on Judaism and the Judaism of Himyar, this region, and another one called Himyar and Israel. And he is extremely generous with his work, and anything I need from him, he emails me, and I email him, and he sends me the response and a photo of anything I need pretty quickly. And I saw him earlier this year at a seminar together in Princeton. Let me point out that Robin did not go looking for Jews in Yemen. You really understand that? He went looking to reconstruct the ancient kingdoms of that region, the Sabaeans and their Sabaic language and so on. But spending a lifetime doing this kind of research, it goes without saying that he's not working in the Yemen now that much, beleaguered country because of the horrors of war that are happening there. But he is the unsurpassed master, knows every square meter of the territory of Yemen. And all of a sudden he realized he's got dozens of inscriptions and so on that refer to Jews. And he wrote, as you can see, these are very long articles, 70, 80 pages articles about the Judaism and the Jews of Yemen at that time. So thank you, Professor Robin. One more inscription, this one's in Hebrew, right? So the Jews of Yemen did not lose their Hebrew. They kept their Hebrew language traditions. They wrote in Sabaic. They did a little bit in Hebrew and Aramaic, as I saw, but here's an entire inscription in Hebrew, not far from Sana, and in the stone. What is this? It is the list of the 24 Mishmarot. What are the 24 Mishmarot? According to ancient Jewish sources, there were 24 rotations of priests who worked in the Jerusalem temple, each for a 2-week period. So this family of Kohanim, of priests, would go to the Jerusalem temple, and they were in charge of the service for 2 weeks. Mishmar means guard duty or something like that. But of course it was religious functionaries. They were just serving as guards. And then when their 2 weeks was done, another group came in for 2 weeks. And so that covered 48 weeks of the year. And you may say, well, that falls short of the actual year. And we think that they didn't do more than that, because if they did, the same priestly family would have the duty on Passover each year, on Yom Kippur each year, right? And that would be a little unfair. So you would rotate a little bit through the calendar year, so you get to do Passover this year and maybe next year during that 2-week period, but eventually, of course, some other family gets that on. So there are only 24 Mishmarot of 2 weeks each, and it rotates that way. And we have lists of the Mishmarot in inscriptions, one in Caesarea, a few other places, and actually in Yemen as well. Their original list is in the Book of Chronicles, and 9 of these names actually appear already in the Book of Chronicles. So these are Jews who are far away, 1,600 kilometers. No, more than that, I think. We'll see that in a moment. From Jerusalem, and the temple's been destroyed for hundreds of years, and yet they kept track of these traditions. They are geographically and chronologically removed, and yet they're able to write these kinds of inscriptions still because they kept track of this information. Now we're going to go to Tzoar in southern Jordan. So this is actually mentioned in the Bible, this place, and unfortunately can't get a better image than this one. It's a little out of focus, even though this is from the Biblical Archaeology Society's website. But this is, again, just empty landscape, right? And to give you a sense of where we are, we're at the southern end of the Dead Sea. And in the story of Lot, actually, the word Tzoar is mentioned. You can see the traditional Lot's cave. It's right there on the Jordanian side of the border. Okay. Now, so just empty space, right? Well, thousands of burial sites have been found there. They look like pockmarks in the landscape, right? You see the roadways running on the upper part of the screen, and there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of burial sites there. Christians and Jews together in the same cemetery. Again, there's halakhic ideas, even though the Jews of Yemen had their own dedicated one, some of the later halakhic ideas that we know of today There are some small communities where Jews and Christians are in the same cemetery, but the Jews are in their own little section of the cemetery, okay, small towns. In America, UK, I've seen this. But here they're sort of randomly in the same cemetery. And if we do a close-up, you can see what these things look like. And again, all it takes is one dedicated archaeologist, in this case a Greek archaeologist, Konstantinos Politis, who has been working for 20 or 25 years here, doing nothing but every season going out during the winter, it's too hot to work there in the summer, funded by the British Museum, to go out to there and record every one of these burial sites and the inscriptions. How do we know who's buried there? Because they have lots of inscriptions, thousands of inscriptions, of Christians mainly, but also Jews. Sample burial sites. Here are some of the Jewish tombstones from there. I told you that eventually we see some Jewish symbols, and here you see the menorah. May I remind you that the Star of David becomes the Jewish symbol only in the Middle Ages. Right? In antiquity, it's the menorah. You rarely see a Star of David. The menorah is the quintessential Jewish symbol, and you see that. You see that right here. So these are just two tombstones. Fine. And you can actually make out some of the words again. I see shalom here on this one. Okay. Now, this one's in Greek, but just to point out, right, they would sometimes do it in Hebrew, Aramaic, and sometimes in Greek as well. These are all from that region that I just showed you. So this one's in Greek, and there's nothing about this person which gives us any indication from the name Saridas Pithala that this person would have anything to do with being Jewish. But it then tells us that this individual was the Archis-Synagogos, the head of the synagogue. That's all we need to know, of course, that this was a Jewish person. And we could actually read this, but it's up the top few lines there. If you want to play with it, right here it says Archis-Synagogue on that line. I always tell my students, even if you can't read Greek, you all know from walking up and down College Avenue in Brunswick for fraternity and sorority houses, you know the Greek letters, so you can make this stuff happen. Now, one of the inscriptions, we only have one of the inscriptions from this area of Zohar in Jordan, next to the Dead Sea, is this one here. And it says, the person's name, Yosef, of the town of Safar, in the land of Chimyar, who moved to the land of Israel. So those Jews in far southern Arabia, at least one of them, right, wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. Now for you, Zohar today is on the other side of the border, and so it's technically Jordan of today, but they, in ancient Jewish thinking, that both sides of the Jordan River are Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel. And so those Jews in Chimyar, and I showed you some of their burial inscriptions in that far southern region of Arabia in Yemen of today, enough of them also felt they should move to the land of Israel and be buried there towards the end of their lives, or maybe they died and their bodies were conveyed. Clear how this worked. And it's dated actually to, in this case, a Jewish way of dating the 400th year of the destruction of the temple, it says, so we can calculate that very easily to 470 CE, and you can see the menorah sort of dashes into the stone, and the other symbols, I'm not sure what they are there. And you can see shalom, etc. Okay, how many of you have been to Beit Sha'arim, okay, in northern Israel? The largest set of Jewish burials in antiquity are to be found here. Very large catacombs. This is 20 kilometers from Haifa. And you go inside the catacombs and you just walk forever there. Okay, and sarcophagi sometimes niches into the wall. One of the tombs, there's some niches in the wall. One of the tombs, one of the catacombs, a smaller cave, it actually is dedicated to the people of Chimyar. So not only do we have the knowledge of one Mr. Yosef, whom we just saw a moment ago, who was buried in the Zohar, in that burial site, but we actually have some group of Chimyarites, no names, but we know they are the people of Chimyar, who moved there to be buried or were conveyed there after their death. Again, camel caravans or on ships on the Red Sea and then overland. And how do we know that? Because on the archway, I know you can't read that, in Greek it says of the Chimyarites. So there you have, in the Greek lettering, of the people of Chimyar. They had their own little, right? In Middlesex County, all the cemeteries are in Islam. You go there and you see the burial site of Tutchin, the burial site of the Jews of Edison and Woodbridge and so on, for example, right? So here you have your own, you do that here in Essex County too, right? So you have that own little section for those people. We wouldn't want to be buried with the people from the other side. Yeah, go ahead.
So were the Jews who landed up in Beit Sharim from Himyar, were they transported after their death, or were they make it they their last breath they kind of made it up?
We don't know the answer to that question. Okay. What would your thinking be? My thinking is they probably died and were conveyed there somehow.
Really? Wow.
But I don't know. I mean, how do you know when you're going to die? You figure you'll get there when you're old, and if you get that fine and you live out your life there. Yeah.
I don't.
What if you live for another 20 years?
But was the halacha as firm then? You were supposed to be buried within a day. It seems like it would be like kind of sacrilegious to spend 5 weeks on a camel caravan.
Right. So clearly,
you get a lot of frankincense and myrrh.
Which they had plenty of. Right. By the way, the Egyptians also used the spices for mummification. Exactly what we were just talking about. I've thought about all these questions, and I think my colleagues have as well, and there are no answers. I mean, I can't imagine that they all said, okay, I think I'm going to breathe my last breath. I'll take the next caravan to the land of Israel, and maybe I'll die there. It's not en route. I just don't know. And everything you just mentioned is absolutely correct, right? Halakhic considerations, but also let's remember that halakhic considerations don't become part of Jewish life in a firm manner until the Middle Ages, and certainly even more so in the Middle Ages. There's a greater flexibility, and actually the real halacha concerning the dead is what we call in Hebrew kibud hamet. Honoring the dead is the number one thing. Now, for most Jews, honoring the dead means burial as soon as possible. But if honoring the dead means burial in the land of Israel, then that's your honoring the dead, and then you don't have to worry about it the next day. Yeah.
What year these? How old are these?
These are all very hard to date. Let me point out that organic material can be dated through carbon-14 tests. Carbon-14, the isotope of carbon. You can date anything that was once alive. You can date the year it died. So any animal remains, human remains, or plant remains can be dated. So if you have some cloth or some animal bones or wood or anything, parchment, anything that came from a living creature. You and I have carbon. This is one thing that unites all living beings. And that can all be dated. We tend not to do it with human beings, just out of respect. But stone cannot be dated. All you can do is stone.
But if it's written in Greek, then it's in stone.
From the Byzantine period, 4th, 5th, 6th century. Something very generic. We can't say more. Almost everything in Beit Sharim is 2nd, 3rd, I don't think 2nd, maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century.
So it would have been a time contemporaneous when people were actually living.
And this is the Byzantine Empire, this time, which was a Greek-speaking heir to the Roman Empire in this region.
Does the fact that it's in Greek and not some other language give any clue to the date of it?
No. Oh, well, within centuries, but not within centuries. Yes, but not. It can't be medieval, by which point Arabic would have been the language of this land. It has to be up until the time of Islam. When Islam arrives, Arabic comes with it. So it has to be up until the 600s or something.
Was Greek one of the languages?
Yes. The Byzantine Empire, headquartered in Constantinople, ruled this entire, modern-day Istanbul, ruled this entire region, and Greek was the language of education, administration, religion for the Christians, and so on. And the Jews, the educated Jews, also used Greek. Now they continue to use Hebrew, but we have inscriptions at Beit Sharim, which are Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. It was a trilingual society. Most Americans are just so monolingual, they have a problem understanding how it's possible, right? But just go to Belgium or Switzerland, places like that, and people speak multiple languages basically from birth. Yeah.
Is it possible that this was like a commercial outpost of the Himyarites, so therefore the people were living, they were living there for business, and then they dropped dead in Israel.
Well, that's another option. If you want to say that these were
It's like the French Quarter in Shanghai.
right, or Hong Kong, the British outpost in China or something. Possibly, the Himyarites had people in the land of Israel whose job was to unload the camel caravans and ensure that the spices got to where they needed to go. All sorts of things. By the way, I'll just take time out before we get to the next set of questions, since we just circled back to spices and so on. What's the other great product of Ethiopia and South Arabia?
Coffee.
Coffee. Right? Coffee is native to Ethiopia. Now, it then spreads to South Arabia very quickly. There's no evidence for coffee yet. Apparently it wasn't discovered by the Ethiopians. I mean, they knew the plant, but it wasn't discovered by the Ethiopians until the Middle Ages. And then it becomes the great drink of Ethiopia and on the other side of the Red Sea, Arabia, which is why you can still order a cup of Arabica today, right? Mocha is a port on the Red Sea in Yemen. How many of you know that? Okay. Nothing to do with it, mix chocolate with it, but mocha is a port. Chocolate, of course, is from the New World. But coffee is a big part of this culture, not in this period, but later on. I just wanted to mention that. And the lore, by the way, it's such a delightful story, I have to tell it. The lore of the Ethiopian highland farmers is that they once saw their goats chewing on some beans and plants, and the goats got rather frisky, and they realized there must be something. So goats are naturally frisky. Can you imagine goats on caffeine now? And that is how the Ethiopian farmers started cultivating, according to their folklore, coffee, and of course it has spread around the world. And unlike other plants, which cannot be transplanted in other parts of the world, coffee can grow in other parts of the world, including, of course, Central America, Indonesia, all sorts of places today. Okay, yes?
They also eat coffee beans.
Yes.
The way you would eat pinto beans.
Pardon?
In Ethiopia, they eat coffee beans the way you would eat pinto beans.
Yeah.
They cook them and
It's
it's a food, it's
a staple almost for them.
It's a protein.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
I want to digress for a little. You mentioned that there was an Arab group or an Arab that converted to Judaism in Yemen.
Right.
I know quite a few, 3 different Yemenite Jews, and they're dark and slow. And I always wondered why they're from Israel, but their families originally came from Yemen.
Right.
Could that be?
So, let me say the following. Let's actually go to the next image to get us back on our map, right? Okay. So, right, I was thinking, and I said something before which is incorrect. Just to give you the distance, okay? The distance from Yemen to Beit Sharim is 2,600 kilometers. Right? It's about 1,700 miles. I said that before incorrectly. I gave you the number of miles. It's 2,600 kilometers, just to give you a sense of how far they transported themselves or somehow moved to get buried in the land of Israel. So the Jews of Yemen are very dark, as are Jews typically in the Middle Eastern world, the Iraqi Jews and so on, but the Yemenites are the darkest. And I don't know enough about the genetics, but I do know that with modern DNA studies, it has been shown that Jews, wherever they are in the world, are more closely related to one another than they are to the people of their host country. So remarkably, Jews from Russia and Germany and Morocco and Yemen are all more closely related to one another, even though they look radically different from their DNA. And geneticists are working on this issue. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that the Jewish communities seem to have been established mainly by men. This is actually proved for Ashkenaz. Traders who got to a place, and then married local women. So that may give you a sense why Northern European Jews are not as dark as Middle Eastern Jews. So, okay. Now, the one area of Arabia which is in between, and this is where we will end, between the northern part, where I showed you, and the southern part, which we spent a lot of time on, is this area here where Mecca and Medina are. This is called the Hijaz region of Arabia. And these are the two cities. So we now fast forward to the 7th century. So Muhammad is from Mecca. The map is in French again. And he flees to Medina, also called Yathrib. And this is the beginning of Islam, 622 CE. How does Muhammad know about Jewish things? Because there are Jewish tribes in the region. There are Christian tribes, Christian groups, Jewish tribes, and Jewish groups in these two cities. And the Quran is filled with such references to these Jewish tribes. So if you don't know the Quran, let me point out to you that the Quran uses many of the same biblical characters. So Adam and Noah and Abraham, of course, and Ishmael and Joseph and Moses and Solomon, right? They all appear, and Jonah, they all appear in the Quran. And they're given Arabic names. So Jonah is Yunus, and Moses is Musa, and Solomon is Suleiman, and so on. So it's in Arabic. But it's all the characters that we know from the Jewish Bible. So Muhammad learned these stories because of his engagement with Jews. And similarly, Jesus is mentioned and Mary is mentioned as well in the Quran because he learned about them from Christians. But Islam developed because Muhammad didn't want to be either Jewish or Christian. But he decided to create a new monotheism for, what he said, for the Arab people. But he got his ideas from the Jews and Christians. So even though I don't have any archaeological evidence to show you from this region, we know from Arabic Muslim sources that there are Jews everywhere in that region. In addition to that, we have the record of a historian, Abu al-Faraj, from several centuries later, who was a poet, and he wrote this Kitab al-Ajani, the Book of Songs, and in there he talks about all the great Jewish poets who lived in that region of the Hijaz, and that they had come there, he says, after the Roman-Jewish wars. That's where we began, the two revolts. So we know they're in North Arabia, and we know they're in South Arabia. We don't have any evidence for them in Central Arabia, where we want to find them because of Muhammad's engagement with Jews. But we do have a record of it from this later Arabic writer. And who are these Jews? They are three tribal names. There's just a Quran manuscript, just to give you some visual there. The Quran mentions Jewish tribes living in or near Medina, and these are the three tribes who are mentioned in particular. Okay, Banu means sums up, like Hebrew good name. Of these three, two of them are given the label Al-Kahinat, the priests. So these must have been tribes of Kohanim, who somehow kept together in their priestly circle in some way in the region of Central Arabia.
Where is Central Arabia now?
Here, the map, right there.
Where does that equate to?
That's Mecca and Medina.
In terms of Saudi Arabia?
Almost all of this region is Saudi Arabia.
It's Saudi.
Most of that is Saudi Arabia.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. At the bottom you have Yemen and Oman, and you have some of the tiny Gulf states on the east. Almost everything in that peninsula, the vast majority of it, 80% of the peninsula is Saudi Arabia today.
Thank you.
And I don't think Riyadh is Riyadh on the map? Yes, it is. Yeah, you see Riyadh to the east of my box? That's the capital of Saudi Arabia today. But the holy city is Mecca, and the second holy city is Medina. So there is our evidence for Jews in that part of Arabia in the 7th century. So we've done a nice tour. We've shown Jews in Northern Arabia, Southern Arabia, and now less evidence for it other than from our Muslim sources in Central Arabia. But I want to end with the following statement by the great historian Jacob Rader Marcus, who was at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati for most of his career and lived to be 100 years old and kept producing scholarship until he was 100. Although he's mostly associated with his work on American Jewish history, he was the dean of all great American Jewish historians. Marcus started out as a medievalist, and he started working on the world of medieval Jews in Europe as well. And we can take his line that he said a great way to end this, and remind ourselves. I showed you the earliest evidence for Jews in these places, right? 202 or whatever that year was, 2 or 3 in northern Arabia, maybe the 300s or 400s in southern Arabia, the 600s here in central Arabia. But in Marcus's famous line, the first Jews in a place were greeted by the Jews already there. Everybody like that? So even though I can only show you the first evidence, the first Jews, they were no doubt greeted by the Jews already there. Thank you very much. A whole new world, Jews of Arabia. Question? Go ahead.
So many evidence that the Jewish communities in Arabia had any contact with the, I guess, the centers of Jewish civilization at that time in Baghdad and so on.
We have no, so the question was, did the Jews of this region have any contact with the Jews in Babylonia, Baghdad, and so on? Baghdad wasn't established yet, so as a city not until the 800s, but at least in Babylonia generally, we had a very large Jewish community. And the answer is we have no evidence for it. No evidence for it. No evidence for the contact. We have evidence for both communities.
So they developed whatever branches, whatever type of Judaism they developed on their own.
At this time period. So shortly after this time period, we do know of a migration of Jews from Iraq to Yemen. We do know of that contact, but not until a couple centuries after this. But it takes, there is contact. These Jews seem to have been in contact with the land of Israel. I mean, not seen, we know they were. They got themselves buried there. So these Jews are tied somehow to the land of Israel, which geographically makes sense because you can just go up and down the Red Sea. You can get to Babylonia, Iraq as well, by sailing around the Arabian Peninsula. You can get there very easily. But that would take a bigger journey. If you look at the map, to sail around the Arabian Peninsula.
How many Jews were still living there? I mean,
Well, not millions. Right. In the 20th century, I don't know what the number of Yemenite Jews was. Today we're talking probably fewer than 100 left in the country. Almost all of them moved in the 1940s and 50s to Israel. And then there was a second migration in the 70s and 80s. A couple 100,000, I think.
Even less. I think it was about
100,000. Yeah. So let me look at this map here. Right. You see the city of Najran? That's actually Saudi Arabia. That is the southern part of Saudi Arabia, right before you cross into Yemen, your son. There were Jews in Najran, in Saudi Arabia, up until the 20th century. Small Jewish community was still there. And then the Saudis didn't want them in their country, and they were moved to Yemen, where the Kingdom of Yemen allowed them to live in the 1940s or 50s until they were all moved to Israel. But just to give you a sense of how old some of these communities are, there were Jews in Najran. I mean, they're sort of an extension of that Yemenite community. In antiquity, it all would have been Himyar. But the national boundary created of Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud in the 1920s, this was all after the Ottoman Empire fell. And then the Yemenite Jews, they were cut off politically, but the Najran Jews were still there into the time of the current Saudi kingdom.
When that king converted to Judaism, did a lot of us follow his book?
So these are the questions we don't know. To what extent, how many people would have converted? Usually when we have examples of this, we know the king and his court, and the family and the court. But the vast numbers of Jews, we don't know. The vast numbers of people, we don't know. Those are the things, and it's true of other examples where rulers converted to Jews. We have 3 or 4 such examples in Jewish history throughout the millennia. Presumably the answer is not, because DNA samples show you that, random DNA samples of Yemenite Jews show that they have Jewish DNA, not Arabian DNA or something. Yes?
Besides the anywhere else, are there currently still existing remaining Jews or small pockets?
That would be
in Arabia?
the only place, I think, in the
That
Arabian.
is the only place?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, today there are small business communities of Israelis and others living in the Gulf states, in Bahrain, and, because they're just becoming great metropolitan commercial centers. But there would be, no continuity from the ancient communities. The only one that has any continuity would be the ancient community. And those Jews in northern Arabia tend to long disappear.
So I just want to thank Gary for coming back and invite everybody on Sunday, February 3rd, where we're going to have Professor Andrew Meyer from Brooklyn College is going to be talking about the Jewish and Chinese religions. That's going to coincide with Chinese New Year's this year, so I hope you can come back.
Perfect. Right.